Um, well, peace and blessings, brothers and sisters. Once again, it is the Cosmocentric Mystic coming at you today with my understanding of kind of religion, so to speak. But the best understanding that I have come across has been the book series written by Muada Ashby called African Origins. And since I've been online, I've noticed that people like to argue and discuss and debate. And like I said before, I think in one of my other videos, this amounts to book reports that we do in school. Basically, people do their research and they report out to people. And so here's a book report. Essentially, I'll be giving a series of book reports related to my understanding, what it is that I adhere to. When something comes from me, it will be from me. But by and large, this is pretty much information that I have gathered and things that I adhere to. So, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So, in the first pages of the book, Wyatt Ashby lays the foundation and he tries to get you to understand what is culture. So here is a kind of good definition of culture. It's the totality of human socially transmitted behavior patterns, arts, beliefs, institutions, and all other products of human work and thought in their interaction with their environment. So that's everything. Everything you do has a group of people together. I always get in these conversations about hip hop is a culture. People argue with me that I have argued or make the debate that hip hop is a culture, and I say hip hop is a subculture, just like rock is a subculture. Jazz and blues, these are subcultures within the dominant culture of America. So culture has within it. So what's not included in this work is a work by I've included some works by Marimba Ani. So, and the reason why I have done that is because she kind of lays the real foundation of understanding, culture and what is meant by that. So, one of the key elements that Marimba Ani, the contributions that Marimba Ani did in her book Yurugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and structure, is give us the idea of what an asili is. An asili is an energetic germ seed of a culture. It's the unconscious energy drive that exists within an individual of the culture. So these are unexpressed, unconscious energies, just like I said, within an individual. So it dictates how the feelings of the individual rises up and is perceived. It's the unexpressed thought patterns that are prevalently held by people within a culture that determine and dictate behavior on an unconscious level. It is the cultural essence, the ideological core, the matrix of a cultural energy which must be identified in order to make sense of the collective creations of its members. So what does that mean? That means, like, when you get into conversations with people, you can tell a person's cultural identification, when we get into these conversations, and then people want to identify with a certain train of thought. So what it happens a lot of times when you deal with Christians, so to speak, and you start talking about civilizations in the beginning of the world, when you cannot talk outside of their ideological context. So they will always bring it back to Adam and Eve, even if you start discussing prehistoric man. One conversation I get into all the time is that Kemet was not our greatest civilization. Kemet is our greatest ancient documented civilization, meaning that its documents still exist. And I always say, look, Homo sapiens sapien, humans have been humans. We've had our capacity for over 100,000 years. during that period of time, that's how long we've been on Earth as humans. During that period of time, we have created great civilizations that have risen and fallen due to environmental factors, just due to withering of time. And so Kemet is one of the last great civilizations that we have documents of. And that's it. Now that's a hypothetical, because there's nothing to really back that up, but that's just kind of the way it goes. I mean, just think about it. Like, we're not, if we've had this capacity to have this type of thought pattern, and this ability to access these thoughts for 100,000 years, it would only make sense that there have been other creations or other civilizations that have existed. It's just because of environmental factors, they've withered away through time. And so that's why you find these ancient creations like Adam's calendar, over 75,000 years old, and people are all surprised, like, wow, I can't believe humans were doing things like that back then. As long as we've had our brain capacity the way it is, we've created this. So when I get into these conversations with Christians, like, at some point in time their mind shuts down, and they in their own mind begin to struggle with, well, Adam and Eve was the first ones, and then according to the Bible, that could only be 4,000, 6,000 years ago. And they begin to struggle with the conversation, and then they get lost inside of it. And so you witness this a lot when you watch these different debates on television. So it's very important. The Asili really determines, like, the unconscious energy of thought patterns. Next is the Utamawazo. Now, the Utamawazo is the culturally structured thought. It's the way in which thought patterns emerge within the individual of the culture that are determined by the cultural Asili. It's the way that thought must be patterned if the Asili is to survive. And so when we think about thought, you're talking about survival of the fittest versus understanding your interconnectedness with nature. So it's like you walk up into you walk up into a situation, and you see, like, let's just say you're looking at an animal kill an antelope, and then you're calling it, like Darwin, I mean, Europeans, they're calling it survival of the fittest. And when in truth you look at it, that's just a part of the cycle of life. That's like a Lion King type of understanding, but that's true. And it's a way to look at it. And although it's been cliched and commercialized, there are two distinct patterns of thought going on here, because evolution has a conversation, looks at that, at least that part of evolution, the survival of the fittest, is a creation of an Asili that thinks in a linear fashion, that thinks that only the strong survive. I mean, we hear that in one of our songs, survival of the fit, only the strong survive. We keep it real to the day that we die. Survival of the fit, only the strong survive. I forget who that was, but it resonated with a large group of people. That's because that is what our cultural Asili, that is what our energetic pattern feels. Whenever we go out, or whenever we say we are just surviving, and then we think that it is okay to enact harmful acts on others just for our survival, then we are acting out of an Asili that is not our own. We are acting out of an Asili that has been given to us, and we are acting out of thoughts that are not our own. We are acting out of thoughts that have been structured for us. Like, it is not we are acting out of Western thoughts. This is what it is. This is what Western people do, but it's on a whole nother level. And so next is the Utamaroho. These are the actions of the people within a culture, stemming from the thoughts of the culture that rise from the Asili. It gives an emotional tone to motivate the collective behavior of members of the culture. So what this means is clearly what it states. These are the results. So a man feels an impression. There are thoughts generated around that impression. And then there are actions generated from the thoughts that arose from the impression. And so this is why you have in today's world such a difference, or such a struggle to figure out how humans can live in the world. Like, this is like a massively recent conversation. Humans have been on the planet, and humans have been Homo sapiens sapiens for 100,000 plus years. We've already discussed that. But it is only within the last 500 years that things have gotten to a state where now the planet is uninhabitable, because there is a certain thought structure, a certain thought pattern that exists on the planet right now that is dominant and that is controlling the resources of the planet in such a way that the planet is becoming unsustainable for human life. And so it's important that we go through initiations, that we go through initiations that repattern our way of thinking, so that we think in a more communal, holistic way. Because if we do not, it is not a joke. If we do not, then we are going to find ourselves without a planet in the next 100 years or so, and that our children's children will have to fight to survive. And it will definitely be the survival of the fittest. It doesn't have to be, but it will definitely be. All right, so culture is a people's window on whatever they perceive as reality in their concept of self. It's a conditioning process necessary for the early development of a human. Culture defines the agenda of society. So remember, the Asili, the Utumawazo, and the Utumaroho all develop actions, and all of those collective actions began to be expressed as a culture. And that culture has a direction. That culture has an understanding of itself. You know, it feels when it is threatened, and it feels when it is in power. And the most powerful engine of culture is religion. In her book, Maureen Bahani explains that, and she dissects kind of like Christian religion and shows how Christian religion has been the mechanism by which the West has spread its cultural ideas. And so when you see Africans rocking with a Western culture, you know, our Arab culture, remember, they're rocking with one or two of those. It's not an African culture. Okay, now there are African cultural elements within it because they're African, but still, nonetheless, it's not an African culture, because it still has a conception of the universe that is limiting, that is related to a certain point in time, has existence existing, and both of them go back to the origin of humans with a certain group of people. They both trace their lineage back to Abraham, so they're essentially the same. I don't make really too much of a distinction between the two. Although there is a distinction, I don't make it, because they just seem like the same. They're just going about it in different ways. A person is brought up and trained in the ways of the culture. As such, the culture's Asili germ seed spirit is transmitted to the person. In this process of transmission, the person's thought, Utumawazo, began to be structured in such a way as to represent the Asili, our spirit of the culture that trained them. As a result, their actions will move the energy of both the Utumawazo and Asili forward on the planet. So that's basically saying, like, as you are developing, you are trained into the culture. You are trained how to think. You are trained how to be. And then you begin to express, as you're developing, you know, you're expressing yourself, and then you're checked on what is not culturally appropriate, what is not culturally acceptable. And then you go through, you grow up, and then as you begin to grow up, you begin to express those actions or those thoughts as actions, more individualistic actions. And then as an adult, you are fully formed, and then you are fully capable now of expressing those actions or those thoughts in actions. The most powerful transmitter of culture is religion. Within a culture's religion, our spirituality lies the training mechanisms needed to transmit the Asili and Utumawazo of the culture. Also within that institution should be the mechanism that allows the individual to transcend the limitations of their culture and identify with the divine essence as a whole. So typically within a person's culture, there will be culturally reinforcing institutions. But if the culture is wise and understanding within those institutions, there will be, how should I say, there will be keys left to allow the person to see the deeper meaning of life. So there should be a way to interpret their religion or interact with their religion where they can understand that the divine essence is the center of life. There is this in Christianity. It's known as esoteric Christianity, and then it takes the meanings of the stories, has struggles within the self, and it teaches you that you are the divine essence and you can transcend limited human experience. But you kind of have to delve and walk around Christianity in order to see that. So it becomes hard because most people don't want to see that, and most people like to interpret the story literally. Okay, but let's look at myth. Now, what is religion? Especially ancient religion, it's myth. All religions are mythology, a codified language that attempts to explain the natural phenomena of the universe through story and allegory. A better understanding of myth is to say that they are a collection of stories that relate human consciousness to the transcendental essence. In the book Comparative Mythology by Pavel, he states that in myth are expressed the thought patterns by which a group formulates self-cognition and realization, attains self-knowledge and confidence, explains its own source of being and that of its surroundings, and sometimes tries to chart its own destiny. It operates to bring a sacred past to bear preemptively on the present and inferentially on the future. What he is saying is that a group finds purpose and meaning in myth. It gives them a sense of connection with the origin of man and the universe. It then provides a way to have that meaning bear down on that person's present life and dictate their future. In similar words, if God created the earth for this purpose in this way, then I must act like this in order to appease the Almighty Creator. By acting in such a way, in such a manner, I become acceptable in the eyes of my Creator and thus secure my place in heaven next to Him. So, the key element in myth is that its stories and characters are designed to provide a reference towards the ideological, moral, and spiritual message that transcends the story itself. This means that the elements of the story have purpose, value, and meaning to your life and the life of others. There is an exoteric outer element, which is the story itself, the characters and the events of the story. This may or may not be true. Like Abraham taking his son to the mountain and about to sacrifice him because God commanded him to. There are two ways to take this story. The exoteric, meaning outer meaning of the story, in which you actually take the characters and the events as having happened in real life, or the esoteric. You actually believe that there was a man named Abraham that was commanded by the Creator of the universe to take his son and sacrifice him. That just before the moment of the sacrifice, God stopped him and told him to sacrifice a lamb instead. He was just testing Abraham's faith in him. The esoteric meaning is that the divine essence requires complete and total faith and devotion if it is to be manifest in life. You must sacrifice that which you love the most in order to appease it. There is nothing a man loves more than his offspring, his son. However, if you are to walk the divine path devoted to God, you must be willing to give up that which you cherish the most. Hence, through myth, ideas and beliefs which cannot be explained in rational terms are freely explored and related in imaginative and creative ways. Psychomythology. Mystical teachings hold that the essence of all of creation and therefore of each individual human being is transcendental. The experience of the human transcends the ordinary bounds of mental perception and understanding. However, since all human experience takes place in and through the mind, all human experience, be they painful or pleasurable, are rooted in the mind. Meaning, you are mind. The other day I was listening to a Zionetta TV kind of expression, and one of the brothers on there said everything is mental. That is one of the Hermetic axioms, that all the universe is mental, all is mental. So everything that you have is rooted in your mind. All perception is rooted in the mind, and it is the training of the mind in a certain way which allows you to see the world in a certain way. So the term psycho refers to everything related to or having to do with the mind. It constitutes everything that has to do with human consciousness, especially on the subconscious and unconscious levels. Mythology as we are using it, refers to the study of the codes, messages, ideas, directive stories, cultural beliefs, etc., that affect the personality through the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious aspects of the mind of an individual, specifically those effects that will have a psycho-spiritual transformation. So, although myths may include things that happen in real life, they should never be understood literally. If you take them literally, you will miss the transcendental message being relayed in the story. Myths are symbolic language that speak to the people in psychosymbolic ways, satisfying the mental need for entertainment, but also affecting the subconscious and conscious mind and its need for growth and evolution. This is why, whenever I talk to anybody, Christian, Arab, Indian, Hindu, Native American, I understand that it's talking about a transformation of the lower self into the higher self. And so I don't get into arguments with them. It is not important to argue. What is important is the evolutionary growth of the individual to me. That's why when I go out and I talk to people in the streets, there is no arguing or debating. Like, I feel like arguing and debating, and I feel that energy coming, but it's not really anything to be done. Like yesterday, I was out there, and I was doing readings for brothers and sisters, and I was selling my book, and I was selling crystals, and these Christians came up to me, and one of them was asking me to pray for God, and the other one was trying to argue about meditation. The person that was arguing about meditation, I was like, well, meditation is not to be sold. You don't sell meditation. Your desire is to experience the highs and the lows of meditation and see its benefits in your own life. That's not a sell. You're either open to it or you aren't, and that's just how it goes. So, myth is the first stage of religion, and the reenactment of the myth constitutes the second stage, ritual. So, the first key to a myth. The myth is not talking about some ancient personality that existed a long time ago. It's speaking about you. It's talking about human life, its trials, tribulations, struggles, and strength, and gives instructions on how to live to attain divine grace now. It is written in a form of a journey in which the person must transcend a limitation in order to fully become aware of themselves and discover their greater essence. It's a movement from ignorance and darkness to wisdom and light. You must not only know the myth intellectually, but live the truths of the myth in your daily life. The myths must become an integral part of your makeup in order to have deep transcendental meaning. Otherwise, they stay at the surface level of understanding. And so myths also show people their heritage as a culture as well as their legacy. They point to ways that a person can transcend the lower levels of being and ascend to higher states of human consciousness, so that they can become a fit vehicle for the divine essence to flow through them and use them to bring greater balance to the world. Well, I hope you enjoyed this first presentation of African origins of African origins, the African Origins series. Until next time, peace and blessings.